So the topic today is the ever-changing world of art. You see a few things that are happening in art today. It is a very fast-changing world, and I'm not sure if I might have bit off too much today, but let's go. I've been holding that windmill because what I'm trying to show today is that I think that looking around at art, looking at the happenings that are going on right now, it's like going on a great big playground. Here I am holding this same windmill, and I'm really thinking of you because I know I'm going to present this class today about going to some of the museums last spring. Behind me is something that people who know me often kid me about in this class because I'm always talking about my college boyfriend, Richard Serra. So there's a sculpture of him behind, and I had some nice shoppers in this gift shop take my picture just for you. So let's look at the art playground today. I started thinking of it as a playground at the 2013 Biennale. I know some of you have been to a Biennale. It is in Venice and in Italy and takes up kind of the lower corner of that dolphin shaped map of Venice there. And this green area, great big gardens, it's called Giardini Gardens. And it's taken over with art every other year. Every other year it's architecture, and every other year it's art. And there are these permanent pavilions you see here, these buildings, and countries all over the world contribute sometimes just one artist who's allowed to show what they can do. They're usually not well-known artists. A lot of them become well-known artists. But to me, it was just a great big playground. That year in the American Pavilion, which you see on the left, a very staid sort of temple to art, like a Greek temple. The artist was Sarah Z. Remember that name because it's going to come up later. Her work sort of looks like a bunch of tinker toys that she combines with objects in a way that she finds creative and I found absolutely fascinating. But it was, sort of a kind of cutting edge at that time. On the left is the Portuguese entry. That year, they sailed a boat from Lisbon into Venice, and you can see these like Portuguese tiles reproduced on the outside, pictures of Lisbon. And inside, they had sort of an immersive exhibit like walking through a garden. On the right is the Russian pavilion that year. In the Russian pavilion, the first room you entered had a giant gas mask and a live face behind it. He blinked, he looked at people. Underneath that was the picture underneath shows another room, was an atrium. Women only were allowed to have see-through umbrellas and walk inside, whereupon gold coins would fall upon them. I'm hoping that you won't ask me to explain any of this art, but I just find it a hoot. I kind of like play the art game. These pictures are from that Biennale. For example, the guy up on the upper left is walking along looking at these photographs. And if I were to be in that museum today, at the Biennale today, I would kind of wonder, is this red object an art object or is it a fire extinguisher? Well, it's a fire extinguisher. On the right, in the same area, were these pictures that are up on the wall, and down below there were some cardboard cartons that were left. Those were part of the art. And then at the very bottom is something that you've seen me do. I did it last week with the cloud with the profile in it that made me think of Magritte. And down below is a picture I took of a little girl who looks like the artwork of the Little Mermaid that sits in Copenhagen Harbor. And it looks to me as if she has a Magritte cloud on a leash. So imagination plays a lot with going through museums and looking at artworks in this playground. Look at these rocks. Now, they don't at first look like they might be a museum masterpiece. After all, they are a pile of rocks. So let's look at the next slide and see where they are and what they are. They are an artwork, and they are in one of the greatest museums of the world, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Once again, I'm talking about an art museum that is like a temple, that is designed, look at the stained glass windows here, where art is sort of revered. And in this early 19th century museum, you have this river of stones. It reminded me of the Stone River that is across the street from the Cantor Museum in Stanford. Connections. Well, if you were at my last class last fall, I said I was going to be leaving in a couple of days to go to the Vermeer Museum at the Rijksmuseum. As you look at the facade here, you see those stained glass windows on the second floor of the museum that we just saw from the inside. It was a magnificent experience, and I'd like to show you a video now of what was behind the exhibit and a little bit more about Vermeer.
On display in Amsterdam, the art of Dutch master Johannes Vermeer. The show is an international sensation, sold out within days. Seth Doan takes us on a tour.
As an artist, he's hailed as a master for his use of light, rich pigments, and the serenity of his interior scenes. As a man, however, Dutch painter Johannes Vermeer is very much still a mystery. His body of work, just about 36 paintings, holds some of the only clues to this once virtually forgotten 17th century artist. Today, even one of his masterpieces can be a museum centerpiece, which makes this exhibition extraordinary. Have there ever been this many Vermeers together at any point?
No, I think also Vermeer never saw himself such an amount of his own paintings together.
28 of Vermeer's paintings have been assembled at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the majority of his life's work. Gregor Weber is co-curator of what he calls a once-in-a-lifetime show. This exhibition was your idea?
I dreamed of this exhibition, but as this dream came true, it is exciting.
You heard that the Frick in New York was going to be closed for remodeling, and you thought they've got some Vermeer paintings.
Yeah.
Let's start putting something together.
Yeah, and if you get them, then of course you can continue collecting all the other ones.
The Rijksmuseum already had 4. Others are on loan from New York, Washington, Paris, and this one from The Hague. Weber likens Girl with a Pearl Earring to the Mona Lisa for her captivating gaze. She inspired a book which became a movie.
A new masterpiece from the hand of my son-in-law, Johannes Vermeer.
But her celebrity came late.
The painting was forgotten, and it turned up at the end of the 19th century. A man living in The Hague bought the painting for a little bit more than 2 guilders. This is nothing.
That would be about $40 today. How Vermeer was nearly lost to history is a story which traces back to his hometown of Delft in the Netherlands, depicted in one of his most famous paintings.
And this is where Vermeer would have stood, probably with his sketchbook, making sketches in preparation of his painting.
Art historian David de Haan notes that during Vermeer's lifetime, neither the artist nor his art ever really left Delft. His main patron was here.
Yeah, that didn't do much good to his fame, the fact that he had just a small body of work and that most of the paintings stayed in Delft and then they moved into different private collections.
Vermeer painted slowly, just about 2 pieces a year. This one is called The Little Street. This woman sweeping would have been down this little alley.
Exactly.
To find this location, a researcher used tax records. Marriage and death records are on display at the Prinsenhof Museum, where de Haan is curator.
From that, we have to sort of piece together a little bit of insights into how his life was. It's a bit of a puzzle.
There are no known self portraits, though some suggest this could be the enigmatic painter who fathered 15 children and died in 1675 at just 43. His widow wrote that Vermeer was unable to sell any of his art, lapsed into such decay and decadence, and, as if he'd fallen into a frenzy, suddenly died. Documents reveal she traded Vermeer's art to pay for bread.
So the local baker had these, what would wind up being priceless artworks.
Yeah, it's sort of weird that you imagine now having a baker owning 3 paintings by Vermeer, but that was actually the case.
View of Delft may have saved Vermeer from obscurity. Nearly 2 centuries after his death, a French art critic came across the painting, describing it as superb and most unusual. He became obsessed with the then obscure artist and helped establish Vermeer as a master of the Dutch Golden Age.
How was it to work on something like this?
It's amazing.
Iga Verschleppa is one of the researchers using new technologies to analyze Vermeer's paintings.
Vermeer's doing some things that we don't see with other 17th century painters. So the very unusual buildup of paint layers, unusual use of certain pigments. So he's really experimenting in his paintings, and that's what really amazes me.
With such precious few works, and never so many in one place, this show sold out in 2 days. The exhibit only runs until June. No surprise, the other museums want their Vermeers back.
Where does Vermeer sit in the pantheon of great painters?
This depends on your artistic feeling. For me, at the top.
So it was a fantastic experience to be able to see this. And one of the people in the class recommended that I see this documentary that for a while was in theaters, and you can now stream it on Prime Video, Apple Plus, or Vudu. It's fascinating about how they gathered together all these paintings and worked with the museums all over the world to get them together. They tried to time the ticket so it really wasn't that crowded. When I first walked in, my first impression was that some of the typical Vermeers that they were just talking about glowed. They were just, they're so vibrant. The one on the bottom left, and you see it big on the right, is not that typical because it's very large, and because it doesn't concentrate as much on one silent scene as we think of the masterful ones. This I've shown in the class before, and it was in the video. It shows the procuress, who's like a madam. She's watching the gentleman caller put coins into the hand of the lady of the evening. And then on the left is a fellow who's looking out at us, and they say that that's probably the only self-portrait of Vermeer. The only things that are really typical of Vermeer's art are that fabulous tapestry in the front and the details on the carafe and the glass that just glow and shine. That's what she was talking about, the effects that he can create. Here's one that's much more typical. The room is as if we're part of it. It is so well constructed. The way the light goes from shining in at the upper left and kind of with a moire effect goes across the wall is typical of him to make it so realistic. It's not what we call photorealism. It's still very painterly, and you'll see details later, but he's able to achieve what I call these moments. In this one, it's the moment when she lifts that glass. Perhaps he's just asked her a question and she doesn't know the answer to it, so instead she takes a step. We don't know, but he captures a moment within that silence. Somebody who was also obsessed with Vermeer, was Tim Jennison. There's a wonderful documentary that you can see on YouTube, produced by Penn and Teller, called Tim's Vermeer. He recreated the rooms. He studied Vermeer astutely to try to figure out how he achieved what seems to be the impossible. He finally decided that he may have used what's called a camera obscura. You see the one down at the bottom, that's the one on Santa Monica, on Ocean Boulevard in Santa Monica. And what happens is it's a pinhole camera. You let the light into this dark box and it reflects the scene from outside. Those are the palm trees along the Palisades in Santa Monica, reflected inside. Perhaps Vermeer was working from one of those reflections in a camera obscura box. This is a wonderful example of his art. Once again, look at how the light comes across the wall. Look at the details on the what it would be a regular still life, like a Dutch still life, in the foreground. Down in the bottom, there's a little foot warmer. Sometimes that's a metaphor, a visual metaphor for the warming of the heart. Perhaps she's thinking of a lover. But the star of the painting is that drop of milk. It is stilled at the moment that just captures something in time. I was really thrilled when I saw that instead of showing whole paintings to advertise that they had the Vermeer show at the Rijksmuseum, they concentrated on some of these details. So here you see the drop of milk, and on the left you see a detail from the painting that we're going to look at next. These two paintings are from the National Gallery of Art. And in that Closer Vermeer document, I learned that they decided during the time that the film was being shot that the one on the right is not really a Vermeer. And a woman comes into the documentary and she gives all the reasons this could not be a Vermeer. They do look different, don't they? The way the one shines on the left, and the one on the right is a little duller. But the Rijksmuseum decided, that curator that you just saw in the interview decided, we think it is a Vermeer. So when I saw the show, it was attributed to Vermeer. This is the opposite side of the facade of the Rijksmuseum that we saw earlier. Under that arch, there is a tunnel that goes to the side that you saw previously. On this side, it faces a giant park that is filled with two other museums that I visited on my trip. Look at the detail here. Pearl earring look familiar? Well, that's not the girl with the pearl earring. Let's see. That's the mistress and the maid. In this one, we have a very dark background so that the details really shine. And the light, of course, is on the woman. And that moment, it's that moment her fingers touch her chin, as if she's really listening to the letter that the maid is reading to her, wondering what it might be. According to the attribution, that ermine was probably squirrel or even cat that poor Vermeer painted to look rich. He wanted to sell to richer patrons who would want to put this up in his house. From Amsterdam, I took the hour-and-a-half drive to the Moritz House in The Hague in the Netherlands. Here it is. It's in the government area of the government center of the Netherlands. Amsterdam is the capital. The Hague is the government center. It has that formal house look, and it was Maurice's house, so it's Moritz House. So you see that formal opening, but this is the 21st century. People are going to be lining up. What they have here on the right side is how you get into the museum now. From that forecourt you see on the left, You can either take the stairs down into the lobby basement or do what I did, go down in that cylindrical glass elevator to the lobby down below. You wouldn't know it from looking at it from this on the left there. And here's the reason I was at the Moritz house. By the time I got to the Vermeer exhibit, the day before it closed, they'd already returned the girl with the pearl earring to The Hague. And in the lobby, as a sort of a placeholder while it was gone, they made this big display. It is the largest 3D photograph that is ever done. I'll show you some details later where you can actually see how the paint is put on. In that little window there is a view of some of the pigments that Vermeer used. So he would have probably been able to grind his own paints and then just put a little pile of the pigment, pour the oil or the turpentine or water into it and mix it. And they come from plants. They come from stones like that ultramarine one over on the right. His pigments have been really analyzed because he got some really incredible color effects. So I went on a quest for the returned pearl girl, and I was really lucky because I was weary by this time. I'd already done a big museum before I got to The Hague, and was very happy to find that behind that door in this very formal type of a museum was an elevator. And I finally found her. Here she is, small and glowing over on the wall. What's magical about her? Why are people so intrigued by her? The same things that I've been talking about, and that is the light on her and the captured moment. It looks as if she's about to speak. It looks as if she might be talking to the artist and saying, when are you going to get this thing finished? I've got to wear this dumb turban that makes me look like I'm Oriental and I'm not, and this earring is really wearing me down. That kind of talk is what you might write if you join my class, the Writing with the Masterpieces. It's going to be in a couple of weeks. What I do is I suggest 3 paintings. I'll tell you the other 2 next week, but you can choose any painting that's museum worthy that you like and write something that you at home that you read in class. It's a Zoom class, and it only would last about 3 minutes. So you might just write something from her point of view, or you might compare her to the Mona Lisa, or compare her to the movie if you've seen that. So I hope that you join us because we really had a lot of fun last spring. These are the details I was talking about, looking at the eye and the lips of the girl with the pearl earring. The daub of 2 shades of white on the eye, the daub of the 2 shades of white on the lips that give them that glistening. The cracking is normal. When you look at her up close, really, it looks pretty smooth. On the opposite wall were entries from a contest that was held worldwide by the Moritzes to get people to show their versions of the girl with the pearl earring, and they're really fun. The United States on the left, in the middle is the Russian onion, and then on the right, the knitted one from the Netherlands. If you go online and look for My Girl with a Pearl, you will see many other results that are really a lot of fun. Another museum that I went to, I flew over to Brussels. I wanted to look at some of my favorite painters at the Royal Museums of Fine Arts of Belgium. I showed you last week some of the Magrittes that I saw. And here we have this, once again, very classical, formal museum. This is the main hall. And I'm showing it to you because I got really into my playground mode when I was examining the big picture on the right here. Across the hall, there was an activity that was going on in front of the big picture on the left. Let's look at that. Here is the picture that on the right. It's called the Parade of the Schools, and it was a parade of 23,000 children from schools all around the Brussels area, celebrating the silver anniversary of the King and Queen of Belgium. They're up there along the left-hand side. They're the only ones that are in light colors there. Some of the girls that are lined up here are actually portraits of children who were children of some of the dignitaries that are lined up along there. While I was examining that picture, I was very conscious of right across that great hall, this congregation of young children, all kind of dressed alike, who were getting ready to go into experiencing some of the art of their own country. Another thing that was down in that lobby was what I'm calling the magic room of Peter Bruegel the Elder. It was an empty room. It had a few benches. You sit there, and it brings some of the Bruegels that the museum is, well, they're really the stars of the museum, and brings them to light. It was really Bruegel, I've already said, is one of my favorite painters, and it was really magic. By the time I found the Bruegels going through there, I felt just like that guy on the sign on the right trying to traipse through, but it was worth it. Most of Bruegel's pictures are like this. We looked at the Fall of Icarus last week, and there are others that aren't typical. You'll see one in a couple of minutes, but this is typical, a Flemish landscape where people are doing their things. You can walk through this picture. You can see people who are at a pub. You can see people at a crumbled church, all sorts of activities. But this is Bethlehem. And now we're in a story that is taking place from a Bible story in a Flemish background. Do you see Joseph leading Mary? They are in the front, very front, in the center. Here they are, Mary with her blue mantle. She's pregnant. He's leading her on the donkey to enter the census in Bethlehem before the birth of Jesus. Here we have, once again, a typical Flemish scene. Now it's a snow scene. But this is not a happy scene at all. It is one that, the way things are going right now in the world, it can be quite troubling. It's the massacre of the innocents, the story of when King Herod wanted to find Jesus and kill him because he might be able to take over the throne from Herod. And sadly, these images are reminiscent of some that we see in the news today. Here's the one that is definitely not typical of most Bruegels. As a matter of fact, it looks much more like Bosch. Probably what you're looking at now doesn't look like much of anything because it's all sort of jumbled together. So let's look at a video about this painting. Use your imagination as you're looking at this as if it's coming alive. In the Bruegel room and in this and in so many things we're looking at today, you see how 21st century technology is one of the things that's changing the way that we look at art today.
The Fall of the Rebel Angels, painted in 1562 by Peter Bruegel the Elder, is held at the Royal Museums of Fine Arts of Belgium. This piece highlights the first confrontation between good and evil, when Lucifer is expelled from paradise. The painting depicts the precise moment when the Archangel Michael condemns Lucifer to the dark depths, following his rebellion against the divine illumination. When he falls, Lucifer brings with him other rebel angels, which have been transformed into demons. At the center of this dramatic and tumultuous composition is Archangel Michael with his wings spread, wearing a shiny gold armor. His right foot rests on the stomach of the seven-headed dragon described in Apocalypse. This monster's presence shows Bruegel's originality as he brings together two biblical stories, one from the beginning of time and the other from the end. Brandishing his sword above his head, the archangel slays the apocalyptic dragon before hurling him and the fallen angels to the depths of hell. Behind them, an infernal spiral of demonic creatures pours down the painting. Some of these hybrid monsters seem to be inspired by the painter Hieronymus Bosch and his famous sense of humor. In particular, in the bottom left-hand corner where a devil, half human, half lizard, is biting his calf and showing his rear end to the viewer, farting in a blatant sign of contempt. Bruegel's inspiration for these demons comes from cabinets of curiosities and discoveries from the New World, which abound his composition. Thus, the wings of the demon in the foreground are those of a Macon butterfly, a species which lives on the European and American continents. Bruegel also uses elements from the underwater world, such as crustaceans, mollusks, and fish, like the blowfish. An exotic specimen from the Pacific and Indian Oceans, the blowfish is recognizable by its prominent teeth and above all by the fact it fills its abdomen with water when threatened. Set against a celestial light blue background, the faithful angels appear robed in white. They are armed with swords or divine trumpets, whose music aims to encourage the fighters. Far away, some angels are already proclaiming victory. Bruegel the Elder's captivating masterpiece, The Fall of the Rebel Angels, can be admired at the Royal Museums of Fine Arts of Belgium in the room dedicated to the Flemish painter.
I think you get an idea of how imaginative he was in that. And it does mention Hieronymus Bosch, and they do have a Hieronymus Bosch copy in the Royal Museums. I think that looking at copies is just like looking at the original because the copies are so faithful. It's done by some of the students. So here we see St. Anthony. Once again, it's kind of hard to find the actual star of the show. He is in the center. On the right is the detail. You can see him in his blue coat. He's leaning down there across from a nun, and he's pointing at a crucifix, saying, I can resist all these temptations of sin because I will stay with Christ. I will stay with my religion. Well, it's one of the stars also at the Royal Museums, and I couldn't resist getting a couple of figurines from it, of some of the more outrageous figures that he created, like the character on skates who's delivering a little cartouche, a little scroll, and it has the word fact on it, probably from the temptation to sell forgiveness of sins. On the right is an unexplained, wonderful fish character that just captured my imagination. On the left, you see at the top a detail from the left panel of the triptych with the fall of St. Anthony. Down below, he's being carried by people across that bridge. And the guy who has the white face in the front is actually a self-portrait of Hieronymus Bosch. Here's another temptation of St. Anthony, done in the 15th century by Michelangelo, the same Michelangelo as the Sistine Chapel and David at the age of 12 or 13. He makes the demons, speaking of last week, by the way, of demons, clinging to St. Anthony, pulling on him and say, look, you gotta sin, you gotta follow the way of the devil. This is the great fight between good and evil. I'm wondering if you can figure out who painted this temptation of St. Anthony. There he is down on the ground in the left-hand corner, holding up the crucifix and saying, stay away from me, you devil. The devil is incarnate in this horse. We know that he's a bad guy by the fact that look at the hooves that on the top there. They're turned backward. Then there are the naked ladies that are the temptation. Then on the right, there is a big phallic symbol, all on this herd of elephants bringing temptation. In the clouds, there's the Escorial that you might have visited outside of Madrid, which it was at different times was a monastery, was a church, was a palace. And so it represents other phases that might be used by St. Anthony to ward off evil. So Lillian, you were right. I just saw in the chat, that was Salvador Dali. And in the upper top, you see these surrealist picture by Salvador Dali that is so much more famous than The Temptation of St. Anthony. Below that, you have another Magritte that I'm bringing up, just as examples of surrealism, which Bosch and Bruegel really influenced. Look at the picture on the right. I wonder if you can guess who this is. I really applaud you. That is a picture by Cindy Sherman, one of the most successful, I'll put in parentheses, women artists in the world. Very successful. And what she's known for, you see a picture of her in the top row, is that she does photographs of self-portraits of all sorts of subjects. Typical people you might see, plays on movie stars. You could see a clown up there. On the right, she had a series of famous paintings. We saw this painting last week. That is Cindy Sherman dressed up like Caravaggio's sick Bacchus. And what about the ones on the bottom? Well, it's like the slide I just showed. These are her experiments with artificial intelligence. She would have done a photograph, dressed up, and told artificial intelligence software, I want you to change it in certain ways. And these are the results on the bottom. So what about artificial intelligence? I love this New Yorker cover, and it perhaps reminds you of last week. It's called Drawing Hands with AI, Artificial Intelligence, after MCE, which you know means MC Escher. The robot drawing the hand, drawing the robot, drawing the hand. I'm reminded of Remedios Varo from last week in her surrealistic work where she had that little robot helping her do her art. Without looking at the caption, just look at these two paintings. They're both of the Roman Forum. They both have a different feeling to them. They both have a different style. The one on the left is bright sunshine, detailed in looking at the architecture and the figures. On the right, it's moodier, more atmospheric, and the details are more abstracted. Well, the one on the right was done entirely with artificial intelligence. We have a new job description now. It's called a text prompter. It's the words that you use to tell AI what you want to have created. And this prompt was a beautiful painting of the Roman Forum, atmospheric, cinematic, sense of scale, and awe and architecture. I think you're getting the idea now that in this class today, what I'm doing is going back and forth between the old and the new that are standing side by side as we look at this playground of art in the 21st century, going back to prehistoric art. Never judge an artwork till you know what it's worth. And I've got this fantastic new app. I point my phone at a painting and it tells me its current market value. Well, the idea of money is really becoming way in the foreground in terms of what museums show, what auction houses are doing, how dealers are getting rich, and what collectors are doing with their art. It's really prime right now in a lot of what we see in the 21st century. This documentary that one of you recommended is absolutely fantastic to show what I think is one of the most incredible stories about money and art. It is about this painting called Salvator Mundi that was attributed to Leonardo, that is today, up till today, the most expensive piece of art that's ever been sold at auction. And I think it's worth looking at a video that advertises sort of a trailer for this documentary that you can see on YouTube about the history of the lost Leonardo.
There are only about 15 Leonardos known. To say I have found a picture like this is just so far-fetched. You're just going to look like a fool.
This is the most improbable story that has ever happened in the art market.
It's not even a good painting. So I find this painting that's cataloged as after Leonardo, the lost Salvator Mundi, the savior of the world. For whatever reason, this picture attracts my attention, and we decided to buy it.
Painting was very damaged, and I removed some retouching. My hands are shaking. No one could have painted this except Leonardo.
The joke was that was a contemporary painting because 90% of it was painted during the restoration.
Something's fishy here.
But that's ridiculous.
We have extensive technical analysis of the picture, infrared, new X-radiography.
It's been authenticated. Wow. Oh, God.
It should be Leonardo attributed.
If it was by the hand of the master, then it would be exponentially upon exponentially more valuable.
It was worth in excess of $200 million.
This is the male Mona Lisa. You're now buying a global celebrity.
Pour négocier ce tableau, j'utilisais un ami à moi qui est un ancien joueur de poker. C'est du jeu commercial.
It's not about art and love. It's about money. It's about transferring funds.
Whenever there's a lot of money involved, the world becomes a bunch of worms intertwined. You can stick it in the desert and lure tourists.
It's not just art history, it's world politics.
Everybody was complicit in dreaming up lost Leonardo da Vinci.
Nobody really cares what the truth is.
240 million. 300 million. 400 million. So,
this is the most expensive painting ever sold in the history of the art world.
Where the hell is that painting? Nobody knows where it is.
I love that last line. Where is that painting? I don't know where it is. Did you see those warehouses? That warehouse, it was very quick, but that's a warehouse in Geneva where they have over 1 million paintings stored. Sometimes collectors will buy a painting without even seeing it and pay for it because of the name of the artist, and then store it. And it never gets to a museum, it never gets hung, and they're all resting there at this special warehouse in Geneva. But since that video, they did, first they found it that it was sold to an Arab prince and it was on his yacht. And now the Arab prince has lent it to the Louvre at Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. Speaking of the up and down world of this crazy world of art, the Louvre is not a branch of the Louvre. It's actually using the name as a license for a certain limited period of time. Then there was Banksy. I'm sure that most of you know the story. Banksy all over the world, sometimes for very important causes, like he was in Ukraine during the war, and he does this graffiti on the walls. And he took one of his pictures, which is the one of his graffiti works, the girl with the red balloon, and put it onto paper, put it behind a frame, and auctioned it off. It sold for $1.4 million. At the moment that it was sold, he had a remote button to shred the paper picture. The shredded picture 3 years later was sold for $22 million. He's at it again. Now he's taking paintings that he finds in thrift shops and putting a little tag on them and calling it a Banksy and putting them at auction. This one they thought would make 2.3 million. I don't know what it was sold for. I read recently that he sold one of these for 600,000 at auction, a charity auction. Okay, I know there's at least one economist among us today in the class, and I'm going to try to explain what NFTs are because they're becoming quite prominent in the world of art. This is really all online. The picture that you're looking at is at the Asian Museum in San Francisco. We talked about the artist Takashi Murakami last week. He sells some of his paintings through NFTs. These are pictures of the tokens that you get when you buy. These are called NFTs, non-fungible tokens. In other words, they're all different. They are not like dimes or quarters that are interchangeable. Online, there's a big blockchain. It's like a stock market. And the price that you pay for that token is for a piece of a work of art. So the price will go up and down. If I haven't explained it, there might be somebody who can explain it better. When I was in graduate school in 1961, I went to some summer classes at the Louvre in Paris and then went on a spree on your rail pass of going around to the great museums of the world. Well, the Louvre didn't look quite like it does in the upper left-hand picture, but it was close. At that time, you could ask for permission and you could paint from some of the masterpieces. It did not have the pyramid, but it was a place that I could run around on that on my free pass and just look at whatever pictures I like, past the 10 or 12 people who were huddled in front of the Mona Lisa and think, I don't even have to look at her now. So I love this cartoon. I think there's probably a picture of it somewhere online. Well, crowded museums have become something important today. I love that poor guy who is copying her up in the right corner there with his little artist beret. So we're going to be looking at the state of museums today. I'm not going to read these, but the Guerrilla Girls set up a code of ethics for museums. You can read them in detail online, but they have to do with money, with how curators and dealers work together, and with the number of women who were put up in museums, that type of thing. Here are the Guerrilla Girls. They are all women artists, and they go to art venues and they protest at the venue about what's being shown. One thing that would make them happy is that there is now a National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. It was closed for 2 years and it just reopened after a $70 million renovation. So this is the way it looks in the classic way. This is one of the new galleries down below. And I noticed this bronze horse. There's one at the Cantor Museum in the lobby that you might have seen. I always thought it was made from driftwood, but Deborah Butterfield was able to make it actually look like driftwood by casting it in bronze. Here's a painting that I saw at a museum in Amsterdam that was done by the fellow on the left. This is the actual painting, and it had this writing. It has to do with what collectors do with the paintings. I talked about the Swiss storage facility and about how artists don't have any really say in it all. This is what he said. This painting may only be purchased by a collector who will donate it to one of the following museums by March 21st, 2020. And then the list of museums: the Moderna Museet in Stockholm, MoMA in New York City, the Tate in London, the Bonhoeffer in Hamburg, LACMA in Los Angeles, and the Stedelijk in Amsterdam. Well, I saw it in the Stedelijk in Amsterdam. Talk about the old and the new. You see the old facility on the left and the new on the right. If you look under the eaves on the far right side, look far in the distance, you can see the towers of the Rijksmuseum. So this is at the other end of that big park. This is a museum for modern art, which scares people. I mean, even though modern art really has been replaced by contemporary art, which sometimes scares people even more. And also design. It has the same type of collection as MoMA. Jerry Saltz, who you saw in that documentary, a well-known, well-respected critic, has a video that I'm going to put online where he talks about 5 things he's learned about art and the art world right now. One of the things that he said that I thought was most interesting is the art world changed more in the last 22 years than it did in the last 500 years since the Renaissance. So I'm doing a little sidelight before we go into the Stedelijk Museum because of the fast changes that somehow seem scary or threatening or silly or stupid when you talk about art as it changes today. But is it art? That's one question that's asked. Thank heavens nobody's ever asked me that in this class. And this one is great. I like this sort of art that no one else understands, mainly because as a result, nobody realizes that I don't understand it either. Well, I think that's a good way of looking at it. As I've said, I consider it all kind of a fun game to play. In 1917, people were certainly upset when Marcel Duchamp did this, what he called a ready-made. He just took a urinal, signed it R. Mutt, 1917, and called it art. It was just part of the Dada movement. Look at the date, 1917. That's right in World War I. The art is saying nothing makes sense anymore. We might as well do art that is just kind of not making sense and call it art. In the picture on the right, you see that work as it stands in NSF MoMA, who has one of the copies of the fountain, as it's entitled. I'm not going to read the text. This is a posting by somebody who really feels that art, the way it is now, is a threat to our society. You can read it online later. Here now are some of the exhibits that I saw in the Stedelijk. This artist calls herself Tenant of Culture. She's changed her name from Heinrich Schimmel. It's really interesting. What she does is to repurpose garments and turn them into art. Here is another semi-intriguing piece called Disco Joke, and the artist who comments on urban environments is showing graffitied electrical units. He's back. We're back to my old boyfriend, Richard Serra. When he's now a world famous sculptor, but when he was first starting, he did these videos, and this one is one that's in the Stedelijk Museum. And what it is a railroad turn bridge on which he's mounted a camera. And therefore you can see the landscape from different perspectives through different views from the bridge. These are old friends. As I said, it's modern and contemporary art. So I just showed you some contemporary, and it was good to see modern art in Marc Chagall. I couldn't fit in the whole title of this into that little circle, but it's called Self-Portrait with 7 fingers. 7 fingers comes from a Yiddish saying of, if you have 7 fingers, you can do things more skillfully. On the right is something I'm running into more and more these days in museums when I start feeling like a museum object myself. These things as objects of design that seem like everyday objects to me. Art for a cause is another thing that is very, very important in museums today. This is a display at the Stedelijk of some of the great posters for protests. Starting with the end of World War II, protest movements, such as we're having today in Washington, D.C., such as we had last Saturday at the Guggenheim, all sorts of protests have taken place to just let people's voices be heard, to let their anguish come out. And that's what the art of these posters did. This was very touching, talking about causes. This is by Margaret Rossler, an American photographer, called House Beautiful. It was a series of photographs from her series called Bringing the War Home. The point here is that as we watch war, this happens to be the Vietnam War, but as we watch footage from the war in Ukraine, from what's happening in the Mideast, we're watching it in our very comfortable homes most often. So what she shows is soldiers within the lovely kitchen, and what's becoming a meme. I mentioned this when we saw the massacre of the innocents, a meme of an icon of the anguish of war, the father with the dead child. So here's the outside of the Stedelijk. If you look in the background, right behind the Richard Serra sculpture, you see the Van Gogh Museum. They're quite close. You also see in the foreground a sculpture that is a type of sculpture you see more often today, This one, talking about causes, is called AIDS, using just the letters. It's based on the love sculpture that Robert Indiana did. We're going to be talking more about love and about Robert Indiana next week. There's also a similar sculpture in front of the Cantor Museum. If you look at it from this direction, you see yo, like yo, how you doing? Or it could be yo, as in I in Spanish. On the background, if you were to walk toward this sculpture coming from the museum, it says oi, like in oy vey, or like in the British, oi, what are you doing over there? And then on the back of the Cantor, we must mention that there is another Richard Serra that you can walk through. Well, we talked about the Van Gogh Museum, and we're going to see much more about it next week. But just recently, there's been a big hubbub in the Van Gogh Museum. They had an exhibit where they wanted to show the influence of Japan on Van Gogh's art. Unfortunately, they chose Pokemon, which is Japanese, as their mascot, not realizing how many Pokemon fans would come to the exhibit and want to have the free cards that were passed out and the Pokemon licensed merchandise. They trashed the gift shop when they couldn't get these free cards. Merchandise was all gone, so they had to close down the gift shop. 21st century for great 19th century painter. Here's another fun exhibit, and this is at Tate Britain. When I first started looking at museums, this museum was called the Tate. Then they built the Tate across the river, which for modern and contemporary art, it became very popular. Now this one is called Tate Britain. Again, that temple to art. But in the garden right now, you can go and see this mobile home that this artist Bobby Baker lived in as a young girl. Inside, she's reproduced it, and some of the pieces in there are actually edible. Talk about changes. Let's go back a few years to the 20th century and look at more edible art and edible-like art. Merritt Oppenheim, who was a very successful member of the Surrealist Dada movement, did this installation called Spring Banquet. Sometimes she would use a mannequin, sometimes she would use a live woman, and people would eat off her. There is a metaphorical content. I'll leave that up to you. Her most famous work is on the right, which, don't ask me why, is a fur-lined cup and spoon. This is definitely a Dada piece, not a ready-made, because she actually recreated something. So, talk about unusual art. There was the recent problem in Denmark. They chose the artist Jens Hanning, who did the work you see up in the upper left, which is just a bunch of money. He's making the point about it's this much money that it takes to do some type of a thing that he's protesting. So when the museum commissioned him and he submitted blank canvases, they were not at all pleased. And so he had to return the $76,000 that he'd received for it. Another thing that you see more and more in museums now is that when you have a show, a special exhibition, they will show two works side by side and compare so that you get to know both of them. In this case, this is a show that I saw at the De Young last summer for Ansel Adams. And it's showing side by side two views. The left is the Golden Gate before the bridge. I didn't know that was the name for the way the Pacific enters into San Francisco Bay, but it is. And on the right, Mizrach's Golden Gate Bridge, both of them using beautiful, beautiful skies for the dramatic effect. And I thought you'd be interested in this comparison. On the left, you have a mountain scene with a snaky river from, and on the right, you have kind of a dirty looking view that is similar. Well, this was done with a camera obscura effect that I talked about for Vermeer. It was done in a tent where they punched a hole and the light came into the tent and showed the outside view. The camera captured it on top of the dirt at the bottom of the tent. So that is what you see there, a photograph on top of the dirt in the tent. Another thing that's happening right now is Yahoi Kusama is doing what her infinity rooms. So many exhibits now are the kind that you can get immersed in, immersion kind of exhibits. She is, along with Cindy Sherman, one of the greatest paid female artists in the world. She is in Japan. She lives in a mental institution. She goes across the street to a studio. She's free to go across and do her work. So this show was also, like the Vermeer show, sold out before it started. And a similar immersive exhibit was held in 1942 by our fellow from the Fountain. Remember the urinal that is called Fountain by Marcel Duchamp? He took these surrealist paintings, one of the first exhibits of surrealism, and hung string around them and had children bounce balls and play hopscotch in the installation. Why? Well, because. And also because he's a surrealist and Dadaist and he does strange things. Here he is in this photograph. He is the fellow holding up the painting. He's in the middle of the three men. The painting is by Morris Hirschfeld, whose work has pretty much been lost to us. It was part of that surrealist show. The Museum of Modern Art had a show for him, but he has been sort of lost. The other people in that painting are surrealists, including Max Ernst and his white hair on the right of the painting, who I said last week was the lover of Leonora Carrington, who's sitting in that rocker, that rather phallic sort of rocker. Those photographs were part of a fantastic exhibit that I've been to twice now, and I loved it so much. At Palo Alto, just an hour and a half away. I hope you get a chance to go. I learned about it in Diane Levinson's class about Stanford University's art, and this is at the Cantor Museum. The artist was an immigrant from Poland who came to New York and went into the garment industry and then went into making fancy shoes. He has a Jewish background and he's displaying it, giving homage here to it in Moses and Aaron. Aaron, Moses' brother, was allowed to accompany Aaron was allowed to accompany Moses to Mount Sinai when he received the tablets. Notice the style, it's stylized. It's like Byzantine art. Figures are flat. There's no reason that figures have to be rounded in art. And it has kind of a showy look to it. I see a great resemblance between Morris Hirschfeld in his self-portrait as an artist on the left and the well-respected, certainly top-tier artist Henri Rousseau, both of them soft-taught, which is probably the reason that Hirschfeld has been lost to us, and the reason that the exhibit is called Morris Hirschfeld rediscovered. This show look, this stagey look, I really enjoy. There's a lot of whimsy to his work, which, as you've heard before, I enjoy. The name of the catalog for the show is called Master of the Two Left Feet. It's written by the curator. I emailed him and said, what about the left feet? He just shows left feet and left shoes. Well, he didn't answer me, but I think it's part of his wonderful whimsy. Here's an exhibit of some of the shoes that an artist has recreated from his design that you see in the back here. This one, Inseparable Friends, you see friends holding hand. One of them is looking into a mirror. Hirschfeld used lots of nudes. He never used nude models because his studio was in his home and he thought his wife might be upset. When I went to the exhibit the second time, I went with a friend. I was so delighted that she's in this class. I was so delighted she liked it as much as I did because it's unusual. And I said, am I crazy? Or is he piling the nose there to make it look three-dimensional? No, it's sticking out. He did the same thing on Moses and on some of his other paintings. I asked the curator about that, but I haven't heard. Here's his pièce de résistance. This is his Girl with Pigeons. So much whimsy. Again, it's staged. It's fun. It's design. He has the foliage around, these nice interpretations of pigeons, and the unusual occupation of feeding it from your teeth. At MoMA today, you can see Hirschfeld's Girl with a Pigeon, and you can also see Henri Rousseau's The Dream, that have so much in common. The stiff idea of the traditional reclining nude that I've talked about, with the foliage in the back and the wonderful imagination. Speaking of MoMA, if you were to go today through January, you will see a great exhibition by Ed Ruscha. Had him in the class before. He specializes in a couple of things. One of them is in paintings of Los Angeles, like the gas stations and things that make gas stations, make Los Angeles the way it is. Here, for example, is the Los Angeles County Museum on fire, and this exhibit is going to be at LACMA starting in April. I think I'm going to have to go down to Los Angeles to see it. Well, the critics are really talking about one exhibit that he has at the show that's going on right now, and that is his chocolate rum. In his background, he has worked with many different things. Sometimes he paints with motor oil or something unusual. This time he has coated paper with chocolate, lined a room with it, so you can go and smell your art. Not to beat a dead horse, but once again, we get 21st century in some really unusual ways. At the Metropolitan Museum of Art, not too far from MoMA, there's two interesting exhibits that are going on right now. A side-by-side of Manet and Degas, and also one with Matisse and Derain, the Fauves. Another place that I'd really like to go to see the art. There's also a wonderful series that was recommended by a friend in this class that I watched on PBS TV. It is about how the Met had to reassess the type of museum that was coming into the 21st century while they were closed for the pandemic. They had to be more inclusive. They had to find ways to bring people into the museum after they lost all that revenue. One way was through a commission called the Facade Commission, where they chose artists to decorate the niches in front. Notice how this Kenyan-born artist has the African background and is stylizing it, sort of reminding us of Magritte with covering up the faces. And on the rooftop, they chose Lauren Halsey, young woman from Los Angeles, who did her own version of the Temple of Dendur, which if you've been to the Met, you know that the museum has recreated it with the actual stones of the Temple of Dendur, which were donated by Egypt, and they've recreated the temple within the museum. On the rooftop, she did her version. She put pictures of the members of her African-American family on the sphinxes and on the columns, and had the expression, "We are still here." If you go to the Guggenheim, we're still in New York. Sadly, last Saturday, there was a demonstration in the Guggenheim where they stood in the lower left-hand picture here on one of those spiraling balconies and protested some of the elements of what is going on in the Mideast. Today, as I said, they're doing it in Washington, different protesters. Here is an exhibit that is now closed, just closed in September. Do you recognize the artist? That is the same Sarah Z that did that Tinker Toy kind of exhibit at the Biennale in 2013. She's come into her own. She's doing the same type of exhibits that you can see decorating the spiraling hallways of Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim, New York. So that brings us to this next Biennale. For the first time, we're going to have an Indigenous artist representing. It'll be in that same, probably, unless things change a lot, pavilion that I showed you at the very beginning. I feel that this artwork from Jeffrey Gibson on the right is typical of all that we've looked at today, where you take a tradition such as a classical artist and show technology to show it, or take a person's heritage and use words to give your message, people like us. Well, that's it for today. Help yourself at the Artomat. This is also something new. You can put $1 in and get an artwork, which might be a photograph, or as my friend who's in the class today did, she put it in and she got this little kit that she could make a bracelet. She is very artistic. She was underwhelmed with the artwork that she could make. I hope you'll join us next week. We're going to do an AI-free emotions in art. In the meantime, please look at the website. We're going to put this slideshow up. We'll put up some videos that you haven't seen. Last week is up now. So thanks a lot.